Now, for a broader chat on the need for the state to possibly increase the regulation of the initiation customs across the country, we are now joined by Anthony Diala, who is a professor of African Legal Pluralism and the director for the Center for Legal Integration in Africa at the University of the Western Cape. A very good evening to you, Prof. And another winter, so of course another initiation season. And unfortunately, again, this period tends to be shrouded in negativity, whether it be fatalities or bogus initiation schools, as we've heard in those previous packages. Tell us what the current regulations look like versus what is being proposed, Prof.
All right, good evening and good evening, listeners. The new regulation called for comment on what is called the draft customary initiation regulations. There's already a Customary Initiation Act which was adopted in 2021. But what the new regulations seek to do is simply to make the act more effective. Specifically, it wants to regulate how the National Initiation Oversight Committee functions, as well as how the Provincial Initiation Coordination Committees in the 9 provinces function. Just to summarize, the Customary Initiation Act itself demands that, 1, initiation schools must be registered. Secondly, traditional surgeons who carry out or perform initiation practices must also be registered. Then it requires the written consent of parents or legal guardians of minors before they can undertake initiation. And then finally, it forbids initiation for children that are under the age of 16. It even goes further to encourage initiation only during school holidays to make sure that students actually go to school. Now, the key thing is the National Initiation Oversight Committee and the provincial committees are set up in such a way that they must prevent the incident that happened in the Northwest, wherein a fake initiation school was found. So these regulations seek to make the act more effective by making sure that this National Oversight Committee perform their functions in an effective manner and prevent young people from coming to harm during in fake initiation schools.
So this would be, as you're saying, to strengthen what we already have that's there, because as you are going through the Customary Act requirements when it comes to initiation as well, for instance, the school being registered, the consent from the parents, the age restrictions as well, we can see with many of these cases, particularly that also make it to the news, that these are flouted. So with the new regulation, what's going to make sure that these rules and regulations aren't flouted, even though they already are being flouted and it does exist in law, that these are the rules?
Yeah, so you know that regulation and enforcement, rather laws and enforcement, they are two different things. You can have very good laws on paper, but the implementation will be a different kettle of fish. So these new regulations will seek to ensure that the implementation of this law is more effective. That's what they seek to achieve. Because if you just leave the act itself, the legislation like that, without tight enforcement mechanisms, then it's not going to be effective. And we're already seeing the results in the incident that happened earlier today.
Yeah. Now, how would you say that there's a clash between the customary and the common law when it comes to this aspect as well? Is there a clash in the law itself?
Yeah, there is a clash. And for us to understand this clash, we have to understand the origins of our indigenous customs, as well as the origins of the laws, the state laws that seek to regulate these customs. Indigenous laws are communal in nature. They have communal values. They seek the welfare of the group. Whereas the laws, the state laws, the constitution, and all these acts that we are adopting to regulate indigenous behavior, they focus on the welfare of the individual. Now, the most important thing is that these state laws are products of colonialism, European colonialism. Whereas indigenous customs were the only laws in place before the Europeans came. So they regulated behavior, but when the Europeans came, they displaced these indigenous laws and made their own laws to become superior. For example, European colonial judges developed a principle that they called the repugnancy clause. Now, this repugnancy clause simply sought to ensure that African behavior must conform to Western ideas of what they call public policy, what they call natural justice, what they call equity. In other words, European ideas of civilized behavior. The Europeans brought laws that sought to civilize Africans to make them to become, in quote, decent beings. So there's this underlying presumption that African customs are barbaric, that they are not civilized, that they are not good enough. And so what happened when the Europeans left? When they left, they created a new generation of Africans who then continued, stepped into their shoes to continue from where they left off. So today, the civilizing role, this role of making sure that African customs are civilized, is now performed by Africans themselves. This is the origin of the clash. When you have customs that emerged in agricultural settings that aim at the welfare of the group, and then you have foreign laws with foreign ideas that now regulate these indigenous customs, there's bound to be tension. And that's the product that we see. That's the clash that we see. You see, individuals going to set up a fake initiation school. They might have their reasons for doing that. You might say that, okay, maybe they are doing it to, I wouldn't know if they are doing it to make money, because if those kids, like with the news, the media is reporting that the kids went there without their parents' consent, then it's hard to imagine where they got the money for the initiation. So if the motive is not pecuniary, then it has to be customary. It means that they are trying to protect their customs, but they are doing it in a way that does not conform with the regulations laid down by the state. That's a clash. So people trying to put their customs forward, whereas the state trying to regulate how those customs are actually observed.
Yeah, and fascinating also history of also putting it all together as well. But also, Prof, do you find that at times that with these other bogus schools that we're speaking of as well, it's not necessarily going against the state laws or going against the colonial influence, but actually quite criminal, because in this case in the Northwest, as we know, the parents didn't consent to this. The children were also even tortured. So we know of cases of abductions, for instance. How does the law then protect those parents and those children?
Right. So that's actually the crux of the problem. The violation of the dignity of the initiates, the young people who go to these initiation schools. And how do you protect their dignity? For you to protect their dignity, the parents must be involved. Okay? In fact, the essence of the Customary Initiation Act itself is to transform initiation practices to conform with the values in the Bill of Rights. That's the essence. And these values are the rights to equality, to human dignity, and to non-discrimination. So for us to avoid this clash, the parents need to be involved, and there has to be a sort of regulation of the way that these schools are run or administered to make sure that initiates are not tortured or do not undergo treatment that might affect their mental health or their physical well-being.
Prof, before I let you go, just finally, what recourse do parents have should they find themselves in that position where their children have been taken to initiation schools without their consent? What recourse do they have in the law?
All right. Obviously, well, let me just restate the position of the law, first of all. You must be, if you cannot undergo initiation if you are not up to 16 years and above. Okay? So, but if you are up to 16 years, then your parents must consent for you to undergo the initiation. Now, I don't want to say, in fact, I don't want to believe that someone is actually kidnapped or abducted, but I think it can happen. So people can be persuaded that, look, you don't need your parents' consent to undergo this initiation and become a man. And so then they are taken without their parents' consent. In the eyes of the law, that constitutes abduction. Why? Simply because if that person is not up to the age of majority, so from 21, you can decide whatever you want to do. You don't need your parents' consent. But if you're less than 21 years, then your parents must consent for you to undergo initiation. If you are taken without your parents' consent, or you are persuaded or deceived or whatever, and you leave for that initiation, the parents have the right to sue. They can go to court and bring the principal or the organizers of that initiation school to court and claim damages. They can also initiate criminal prosecution against those in cases where the initiates or their child, encounters harm in that particular initiation school. So these are the remedies that are available to parents whose kids are taken without their consent.
Prof, thank you so much for sharing your legal expertise with us this evening. Really appreciate your time. That, of course, is Professor Anthony Diala, who is from the African Legal Pluralism and Director at the University of the Western Cape.